Awesome. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashwin. I lead marketing at MoEngage. I will talk about MoEngage in a bit, but we have an interesting guest who will be speaking about an interesting topic. We will be talking about marketing technology and then how to check if your current technology can help you stay in tune with your customers whose expectations today are rapidly changing and evolving. Why this topic? Well, it's simple. With customer expectations evolving rapidly in a digital world, marketers are forced to rely more on technology to meet those expectations. Which is why a significant portion of marketing budgets today are earmarked for software purchases. In fact, I think almost about 26% of marketing budget today are spent on technology, which is a lot of money, which is why we chose this topic. And we have a very accomplished technology leader on this webinar today to talk about Martech. Why did we invite a technology leader and not a marketer? Well, it's called marketing technology, so we thought it would be interesting to hear perspectives from a tech leader about how they look at this and their thoughts about it. But before we jump into it, a quick intro about MoEngage. This is the 30-second sales pitch. MoEngage is a cross-channel marketing platform that helps consumer brands, deeply understand their customers and engage them across multiple channels in a very personalized manner. So with that, let's jump right into it. Please allow me to welcome Meri Williams, Chief Technology Officer of Pleo. Meri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me. As you mentioned, I'm CTO at Pleo, but I was previously CTO at Monzo, at Moo, at Marks & Spencer's, and I grew up at Procter & Gamble, so I come from a rich marketing heritage from that perspective, and really excited to be here today to chat to everybody. We've entitled this 5 signs, the top 5 signs that your Martech stack isn't future ready. And so I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that I see when people are choosing technology solutions or when they're living with their tech stack that they have, particularly how it relates to Martech. The first sign I think that your Martech stack isn't future ready is just when it's outdated technology. And I think it's the reality for a number of us that we have a reliance on legacy systems. I joke sometimes I've worked on systems so old they weren't legacy, they were vintage. I worked on some mainframe systems when I was early in my career that were older than I was. But it does make it very difficult to adapt to new trends and technologies when you have these very outdated systems that tend to run on-premise instead of in the cloud. They tend to have quite limited scalability, limited opportunity for future growth. One of the worst examples I saw this was when I was CTO at M&S, of M&S.com, where the business had spent over £100 million to commission and build a new website that promptly, when it went live, halved conversion. It was a very, very tough time for the business because although they had made this big investment in a new website and a new stack, they had done so in a way that took 5 years to execute. So actually, by the time the new system was live, it was already out of date. It was already very difficult to keep up with the demands and the needs of the business, even from the moment of go live, because it had been such a long road. And so I think the key message I have here is that it's absolutely worth considering how your tech team is going to react, how your IT colleagues are going to react, and making sure that you choose more modern tech that is going to be easier to scale and easier to develop into the new capabilities that are needed as your business grows and hopefully scales. The second sign I think that your Martech stack isn't future ready is when your workflows are very inefficient. That can mean you can see signs of this if there's lots of duplication of effort across key tools, if there's a lack of automation, if you're having difficulty measuring the return on investment. And I have seen this at Pleo. We've found that we had bought lots and lots of different tools, but they weren't cohesive. They weren't able to automate our key processes, and we had a really tough time measuring the return on investment. I actually found the same when I was at Monzo, even though we had at Monzo largely taken an approach of building our own tooling and building our own capabilities, not thinking in a really holistic way about what the workflows looked like, and not thinking through the end-to-end processes was something that we had some trouble with in the early days. It's obviously a much bigger organization now with a much more sophisticated set of internal tools these days than when I was there. But it was a real challenge that we kept buying tools that didn't necessarily match the way that we needed and wanted to work. There's a saying actually in kind of tech and IT circles that if you try to change process by just changing technology, you'll often fail. And a lot of the early projects in my career that I worked at Procter & Gamble were almost a masterclass in this. We kept trying to change the way people worked by changing the technology that they worked with, rather than first realizing that we needed to, even if it was in a manual way, change the process and get people used to the new process before we then sort of enshrined it in the technology. And I think there's two different approaches that you can take with this. You can either say, I'm going to trust the tool to have the best-in-class processes. And so you adapt your processes to match a best-in-class tool and make it match with the software. Or you pick software that's really flexible, that has a lot of opportunities to adjust the workflows to make them match how you want to work. And I think that that's a key, almost strategic decision that you need to make when you're deciding on tooling, is whether you're going to put the effort in to adjust the way you work to the way that the tool works, or whether you're going to find something flexible enough to adapt to the way that you want to work. I think a lot of this is also about your culture of your company, whether you tend to iterate a lot and try to improve things a lot, and so have frequent changes to your processes and to your workflows, or whether it's more likely that you're kind of going to enshrine something and then keep it in that way that you've enshrined for a really long time or not. And so I think that there's some strategic choices here about how much you match the process to the tool or the tools to the process. But there's also a need to be realistic about how frequently your processes and your workflows change and adjust accordingly. The third thing that I've seen, and you'll notice I haven't got examples here because I think everywhere I've ever worked has had this as a problem. But the third problem that I see really, really frequently is data silos. So disconnected data sources mean that you can't get consistent insights. An inability to create a unified view of the customer is a problem literally everywhere I have ever worked has had. And then that causes a load of challenges in personalizing your marketing campaigns, in delivering targeted messaging, in making sure that your product adapts to the customer and is personalized to the individual rather than just to one of a few personas. And so many organizations will have a need for to be possible to export data in a really easy way, to understand the schemas, the structures of the data, and to be able to pull it out into a different system or data platform, or we increasingly hear about data lakes. If you've heard the term data lake and wondered what on earth it means, it's just a way of pulling a load of unstructured data into one place that you can then add structure to it on top. So think of it as this big lake of data that you then use pipes to pull water out into the right structures and shapes that you need. And so I think when you're looking for Martech solutions and for tooling, you want to either really believe that that tool is going to be able to import all of the data that you need from all the disparate sources, or that it's going to export data very easily into your broader data infrastructure and architecture. If you don't have that, then you end up spending half your time just talking about why this system says something different than this other system. You end up spending a lot of time with your analysts arguing about whose numbers are right, rather than talking about what the actual insight that you get is from those numbers. And I think that it causes a lot of busy work for teams, that they're trying to either investigate or detail out why things don't match, or why the insight is different from one tool than another tool. And so the ideal here is to really work very closely with your counterparts in IT, and if you have a data team, in the data team, and make sure that they can get everything that they need out and put it into the analytical tools that you're using in your organization, whether that's Tableau or Looker or any of the other options that exist. The other thing that you can look for is whether there's really, really good analytics in the tools themselves. But again, sometimes the challenge comes when you've got multiple data sources, multiple bits of insight that you want to bring together. And so I think the easiest thing, if you have an existing data infrastructure, is to look for easy export of data. But if you don't have that, then to look for what the analytical capabilities are of the tools that you're looking at and choosing. The fourth sign your Martech stack isn't future ready, and this is just as common as the data silos one, is a lack of integration. So you have an inability to share data across different platforms. There's manual work required to sync information across systems. And this also often results in a lack of real-time information. So you're making decisions based on outdated info. It's very difficult to have a holistic view if you've got different platforms and different systems and different tools that can't or don't talk to each other. When I was at Moo, we had a really big challenge with this, in that our product platform, our customer service platform, and our manufacturing platform were all very separate. And so it was very difficult to follow an order all the way from a customer making it to it being manufactured to it then being delivered, and then any subsequent customer service that needed to happen. And we ended up needing to build a system on top of each of those three different systems to make it possible to connect across the platforms. And a lot of that wasn't a marketing specific challenge, rather a operational challenge. But I think that we see exactly the same thing in Martech, where if you don't have good integration, if there aren't good APIs, API just means standard interface for asking for something and getting it back consistently. So think of an API as being like a menu. You can order off the menu, and you can be reassured that you're going to get exactly what you order every time. That's essentially what an API does. It just gives you the consistent response to whatever you ask for. And so if you have APIs, then you can do a small amount of coding to connect systems together and to make them speak to each other in a consistent way. But if you lack that, and you've only got the ability to, pull a big file out or that kind of thing, then you end up having to do all these manual processes, file uploads. Things go wrong if somebody forgets to do it one day or doesn't do it in the right way consistently, and those kind of things. And so the thing to look for is really great APIs, but also really good documentation of those APIs, which sounds like the least exciting thing in the world, but I can tell you how excited engineers get when there's really good documentation and really good APIs. It means that we can meet almost all of the business needs by just doing little bits of coding, little bits of scripting to hang these different systems together in a cohesive way. And then the last, but I think most important challenge that I see is when there is a lack of alignment between don't know what happened there. I think we've lost the slide. Sorry, Ashwin.
Whoops, sorry. With me.
So let's go back to that.
Yeah.
No problem.
Whoops.
Just back one. There we go. I think this is actually the biggest problem that I see is when there's this lack of alignment between business goals and the capabilities of the technology. So if your Martech stack doesn't support your overall business strategy, you'll have difficulty measuring the impact on key business metrics, and you'll have an inability to adapt to changing business needs. When I was at M&S, it was very obvious that people had selected solutions based on what sounded best rather than what was most strategically appropriate. And there was some really interesting side effects of that. One of the ones that I remember most vividly was I arrived at M&S, and one of the early conversations I had was, it's a quite different demographic in terms of customer. It's a little older than some of the businesses I'd been at previously. And I was interested in whether that meant that we had older devices being used and that kind of thing. And they went, "Oh no, we're really lucky. We don't have anybody using, iPad 1 or anything like that." And I thought that was very odd because, certainly my parents and my grandparents were using older devices. I thought it was unusual that we weren't seeing that coming through in our stats for the main product. And so I brought an iPad 1 in and tried to open the M&S website on it. And it didn't just crash the browser, it crashed the entire iPad. And so I was like, I think I understand now why we don't think anybody is using these devices, these older devices on our website. And it was just a reality that, sometimes you can't see the data that's missing. And in this case, the tools that had been chosen, the product strategy that was being followed hadn't taken into account the reality of this business, that it had a lot of customers and consumers who were a little bit older, a little bit more likely to use slightly older technology, and we then couldn't meet their needs. And I think, that's an example where we're talking about the end customer, but I think the same thing can happen very easily with internal tooling. If you're not making sure that your stack meets your overall business strategy and is in line with your overall business needs, then you're always going to be struggling to articulate how you're really doing. But also you're going to struggle to get the value out of those tools that you've spent so much money on, made such a big investment in implementing. You need to make sure that the tools that you choose are both aligned with your business strategy and choices, but that they're also able to adapt and change as the business changes. Hopefully we're all in a situation where we're growing our businesses, where by investing in Martech, getting better and better at making the right investment at the right time in the right channel, or the right advertising, the right opportunities to help the business grow. And those are, what the right thing to do is going to change over time, but also how to do the right thing is going to change over time. And so we need to make sure that we're really aligning those business goals with the choices that we're making from a tooling perspective. And those are the 5 signs that I see that your Martech stack isn't future ready. And I think we're now going to go into a bit of a chat about more of the detail, right, Ashwin?
Yep. Thank you so much, Meri. I think that was very insightful. I do have a few questions, and then if the audience, if you have any questions, please do type them on the chat, and we can pick up those questions as we go along. I'm going to stop sharing screen so that, there you go. Now that's much better. Awesome. Just to sort of recap, Meri, I think you spoke about outdated technology, you spoke about data silos, you spoke about lack of integration, spoke about alignment with business goals, and then you spoke about the I think, yep, there you go. Awesome. When you mentioned the funny thing about how you sort of, purchased the technology and then it sort of took 5 years to implement it, right? Like it sounds funny when you say it, but I'm sure it wasn't so funny when it happened. Right? But when you're sort of evaluating a technology platform, right? And then as a CTO, I'm sure you get involved, you get pulled into saying, look, we want to buy this new tool. What do you think about it, right? What is sort of what are the red flags that you look for, which makes you say, this is going to take 2 years to go live, right? Like, what are the red flags? Like, how do you sort of pick this with?
So I think the primary things I look for is how flexible is the solution? Is it able to adapt to business needs? Because if something's very inflexible, it tends to take a long time to implement, and then it takes a long time to make the changes as you keep going. I look for how good the APIs are, which I appreciate it's a sort of nerdy technical thing to talk about, but think about that as just how well can it connect to other things. And one of the direct questions to ask your technical colleagues is, do the APIs on this look good? Do you think you'll be able to connect it to our other systems well? I look at whether the integrations are there, whether the software can integrate easily with the other major platforms that we have, if that's necessary, and then how easy it is to bring data out of that system into. In most of the organizations I'm in, they're a little bit bigger. They're not early stage startups. They tend to be scale ups and larger, and so they tend to have their own data platform of some description. And so making sure that tool can be useful on its own and have sufficient analytics that you can make good decisions within the tool if that's appropriate, but also that you can pull the data out and then have it in your broader data infrastructure, I think is really important.
Wonderful. And I think, you mentioned about being flexible enough to sort of, look at the future requirements, right? And often in high growth sort of companies, these sort of goals and requirements changes, especially with marketing, right? Like every 6 months they're going to come back and, there's this shiny new thing that we want to try out. And, and then it's like, but the tech team doesn't want us to do it. They're just being blockers around it. So how do you sort of deal with this? That there's going to be constant sort of evolution of requirements on the marketing side. And then you're like, guys, there's only so much that we can do here. But how do you sort of, manage that? And how do you sort of manage that conflict, because it's a lot more cultural also, I would assume.
Yeah. I think there's a real risk that the tech folks or the IT department or whatever we're called in your company, we can become chief saying no officer. And I think that's not a great outcome for us. It's not a great image for us to have. But it also is because we're very aware of the risks and the costs of implementing new solutions. And so I think what you want to avoid is having to do a integration project or a transition project every year or two, not least because you then struggle with having consistent data and history and ability to measure over time. And so the ideal is to find a solution where you can see that they're continuing to invest in keeping it current. They're on top of what the trends are in the market in terms of like what does best practice look like, and that the solution itself is quite flexible. The mantra that we tend to have in tech is that it's better to configure than to customize. Configuring is when you just sort of tweak the options that are available in the software itself. And customizing is when you have to write special code to make it do something that it's not designed to do. And the more of that customizing that you do, the harder it is to keep things up to date, the harder it is to keep things working in the face of changes, to adapt to the future. And so although it feels like it's a great idea because you can make the solution do exactly what you want, it actually costs you a lot in ongoing maintenance, in ongoing adaptation. And so it's better to find a software and a tooling choice where you genuinely believe that they're going to keep up with the industry. They're going to keep offering the latest capabilities as time goes on.
Awesome. And I think you also spoke about data silos a bit, right? And then you spoke about how universal this problem is, right? I mean, I've been hearing about data silos the last, 15, 20 years, I suppose. And I think a lot of Martech vendors made a lot of money promising that you're going to have a 360-degree view of customers, but the reality is always very different, right? Like, why do you think this sort of building that or breaking down those data silos is so difficult? I mean, is it because it's on the tech side of things? Is it because it's like, just the nature of customers and then the interactions and the touch points which make it very difficult? Like, why do you think that's such a very difficult problem to solve?
I think there's a couple of things. I think a lot of vendors are trying to become the single source of truth, and so if you choose 3 different systems that are more focused on being the one place that you go than they are on integrating well with other things, then it can be very problematic, because you've got what is essentially a kind of systems fight happening in your company. I think something that's really positive about the new range of typically software as a service type options that have become available is they've accepted much more that they need to integrate well with other solutions, that they need to let data in and out very, very easily in order for you to be able to get that single source of truth in one place. And so the mistakes that I see people making are not being clear about where the single source of truth should be, which system should be like the golden source of information, not caring enough about APIs and about integrations and about how things connect to each other. I think it is solvable, but it's about really strong collaboration between the vendors that you use, your own company, and your tech team within your company. Because in an ideal world, most data platforms, they do have a way of bringing in lots of different data sources, and they can then use those to give you a single view if you have a data platform. But if you don't have one, then I think it's really important to choose a tool that is going to integrate well and is going to bring in those data sources from elsewhere so that you can have everything in one place. And so it's, I think, partly a cultural thing about collaborating really closely with your colleagues who are technical, and then partly a decision about the tools that you actually choose and how well equipped they are to reduce those silo effects.
Interesting. Got it. And then, just talking a little bit about culture, right? Because that also sort of, you brought an interesting point in your presentation, which is really about business goals and how does everybody sort of collaborate towards those business goals, right? But often, the technology team has their sort of KPIs, and then marketing has their KPIs, and product has their KPIs, and then there's the CEO who's like, why isn't my team working together? But he can't. How do you sort of build that culture? And typically, there's a lot of advice, content, experience out there which talks about how marketers and salespeople should work together, marketing products should work together. But this whole marketing and tech dynamics is still new, right? I mean, it's still, so how do you sort of, in your opinion, in your experience, how does this, collaboration culture gets built? Like, what advice would you give to someone who's like, who can make this happen?
Yeah. So I probably talk more with the tech side of the equation about how they need to adapt. And what I tend to say to them is that they need to learn to speak marketing. They need to understand what matters to a marketer. They need to understand how they can meet those needs, what the systems do, how they fit together, and those kind of things. And so I suppose if I were giving the marketing side of the equation a bit of advice, it would be learn enough about the tech to be dangerous. Learn enough that you can ask good questions. You can have a conversation with your tech team about how good the APIs are or aren't, and have good conversations about, how are we going to make sure this data doesn't end up trapped in one system and not connected to all of these other places? Which integrations do we need to worry about? Which other systems do you want to be able to cross-reference with? So if you really need to be able to know the end impact of your marketing efforts, maybe you want your systems to integrate all the way down into your finance and billing systems, because then you can directly see whether, sales went up or down and so on. It's not always necessary to go to that level in order to integrate. But yeah, the main advice I would give is like learn enough of the tech speak to be able to engage with your colleagues in a really positive way. And what I often recommend my technical colleagues to do is to make friends and do a skill swap with somebody who's in a different department. So I'm sure that there is a technologist in your company who would love to understand more about marketing and love to understand that world a bit better. And so I think it's really, really worthwhile to kind of form that alliance and do a bit of a skill swap. And if you can get one of the people in the tech team to really understand marketing in a really good way, and they can teach you enough tech to ask great questions when you're evaluating these kind of tools, then probably you'll get to the point where you're bringing a better subset of tools for that real consideration You've already checked that there are APIs, checked that the data is not going to be siloed, checked that there's enough flexibility in the processes and in the actual kind of internal workflows for what you need. But I think it also builds a real bridge if you can have that shared language or learn each other's language well enough to do really well.
Amazing. I mean, I love that, like know enough to ask dangerous questions, right? And I think that's how respect gets built, right? Because, the other side of the equation is going to be, oh yeah, okay, this person knows what they're talking about, right? And, and I think, and that's a very interesting one. I have a couple of more questions, but, it's and then we'll sort of wrap this up. There's the big sort of elephant in the room today is AI, right? And everyone's like, yeah, let's do AI, let's do this, let's do AI. Like, what's your thought on that? I mean, we saw recently Apple sort of partnering with OpenAI, and then there's a lot of opinions for, against, controversial, conventional opinions, and all of that stuff, right? But in terms of AI itself, obviously the improvements in AI was very unexpected. I don't think people were taken by surprise. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know AI could do this. And then, it just burst onto the scene. But how do you sort of see AI and then the implications of it from a marketing technology perspective, right? I mean, there's a lot of things about content and design and all of that, but simply from a technology perspective, because I know for a fact that a lot of marketers are being asked saying, look, AI can write content, AI can do design, why do you need so many people, right? Or why do you need so much budget and all of that? But would love to understand from a technology, from a technology leader in terms of where do you think the future, or if you were to guess.
Yeah. Where's it going?
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of really interesting. I'm actually from an AI background, so there's a risk that I will, spend the next half hour just talking about this. So do stop me when I get too excited. I think there's some really interesting things that have happened in recent years. Even before Gen AI came along, we had a load of improvements in machine learning, and so I think traditional machine learning is super relevant to the Martech conversation because you have so much data, and when you have a lot of data, traditional machine learning is probably the better thing to use. It's basically a way of taking a data set and learning from it at a really large scale. So computers can process the volume of information that's just impossible for a human brain to do. And so the one bit of advice I've got is, don't forget about that traditional machine learning. If you have a lot of data, if you have more than 5,000 data points, probably machine learning is the more useful thing for you to invest in and to look at. And it's very worthwhile, and there's a lot of value there. On the generative AI side, I think that people are, I think it's very useful. I think it's got a lot of opportunity, but I think a lot of people also misunderstand what it's good at. So Gen AI, the large language models and OpenAI and similar, ChatGPT, it sounds like a really clever person, a really erudite person. And because of that, we tend to go, oh, I can trust this with the sort of decisions that a very smart person would be able to make. But actually, it's good at sounding smart, but not good at being smart. And so I think that what we're going to see is that people are going to realize that it's really, really good at summarizing and at synthesizing information. So taking in a load of disparate stuff and then giving you a good summary. It's good at giving you a starting point. But it's not going to be brilliant at emotional content, for instance. I don't think that AI is suddenly going to write better ad campaigns than marketers can, because there's a human element to that that's really important. I think that the best attitude towards generative AI is one that I have a friend who did a presentation recently about how they started out as a translator, and they were very proud of having gotten their English degree. They were in mainland China, very proud of getting their English degree, sure that they could give much higher quality translations than anybody else. And then Google Translate came out, and suddenly they were slower than everybody else, and that was their real problem. And so their attitude changed from seeing Google Translate as a real risk and a threat to their business, and instead going, well, what if they could use it, but then also add the fact on top that they had the higher quality? So they used it for the speed, but then added the more human touch on top. And I think that's what I think is going to happen with AI, is that we're going to start using it to make our jobs more efficient, to make our jobs easier. We need to use it for what it's good at. And then we also need to remember the stuff that is much better coming from a human. I don't think we're going to suddenly find that there's lots of AI created advertising campaigns or TV ads or similar. I think we might use AI in the creation of them, but I don't think that just going, the computer can do it now will work. I think that we have to be so cognizant of the things that humans are better at. We're better at emotion. We're better at speaking to the heart. We're better at eliciting an emotional response from each other. And there's a real risk that we end up with just a lot of stuff being written by AI that's then summarized by AI before it's read by a human, which I don't think is going to be a bright and wonderful future. So I think try figure out what it's really good at, try use it rather than be used by it, and become more efficient using AI, but remember which things still need to be a human and have that human touch.
Very interesting. So hopefully we are not at risk of Skynet.
Yes.
But that's an interesting one, right? I mean, you mentioned about the sort of, I'll call it as predictive sort of AI, right? Which isn't your Gen AI, which tells you like, hey, I've analyzed all this data. Here's the best time to send a message, right? Or here's the most preferred channel for which your customers would like to interact with, or here's sort of like the ideal cross-channel journey that we can build and things like that, right? And that generally saves a lot of time, because otherwise it takes a lot of time and effort to arrive at those decisions manually. Even if you want to, right? It requires collaboration, data teams and analysts and engineers and all of that. But funnily enough, what we see is that a lot of marketers don't adapt it. For some reason, there's a lot of, I don't know. And interestingly, we asked about 1,000 marketers saying, how long does it take for you to launch a cross-channel marketing campaign after you've decided that, this is what we're going to do?
Yeah.
And they said, it takes like 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, right? But you know what? We asked another question before that. We said, how important is real-time sort of interaction and real-time, response matter to you? And everyone's like, yep, this is the most important thing, for us. So clearly everybody wants real-time, but the reality is like, it still takes us weeks to get us, to launch a campaign, to look at analytics, to sort of tweak it. So I think, so if I were to sort of transpose that, I think that's where the opportunity is, a large opportunity to sort of use AI to be more real time, to just sort of increase our speed and agility in terms of just being more sort of relevant to our customers at the right time, at the right, channel. Amazing. Awesome. I think we're almost on time, but thank you so much, Meri. This has been wonderful. And then, I had fun as asking those questions, and then hopefully, you've had fun as well, and hopefully the audience will get something out of it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It's always nice to talk to folks in other specialties, and I appreciate being invited to give the tech perspective on things on this occasion. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.